Papers, and now we'll go to our studio guest, the Assistant Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, who is a member of the Expenditure Review Committee, and as Malcolm Turnbull pointed out this week, they too have problems with leaks.
There have been a lot of reports of leaks from the ERC. I'm not a member of the ERC. I wasn't party to the conversation. If I had been, I wouldn't discuss it anyway. I know this sounds prissy in some respects, but I don't think we should be discussing decisions, debates inside the Cabinet or committees of Cabinet like the NSC or the ERC. I think what we can do, once a decision is taken, then an announcement should be made. It should be put on whoever the appropriate letterhead is, and it should be made and the ministers can speak for it.
Josh Frydenberg, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Barry.
So Malcolm Turnbull's right, isn't he, that it's not just the wider Cabinet, but it's that exclusive group of which you were a member, the ERC, that leaks as well.
Barry, insiders by name, insiders by nature. I mean, what matters to the Australian people is not who said what to whom around the Cabinet table, it's the outcome of those deliberations. And when it comes to national security, the Cabinet has taken a very strong position that we will go down the path of the United Kingdom, France, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, and revoke the citizenship of dual nationals who've been involved in terrorism. And we need to do that because 110 Australians are over there fighting for ISIS in Iraq and Syria. 30 have already been killed, including a number who are suicide bombers. And the experience out of Afghanistan is that those people who have participated in terrorist activities abroad do come back to Australia and do try to recommit such offences.
OK, you say it's an insiders issue. Doesn't it go, though, to the question of how you function as a government? I'll just give you an idea that this week the ERC knocked back this idea of opening up the domestic routes in Northern Australia to foreign airlines. The ERC met at 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. At 1:59, 2 hours earlier, the decision was announced in the Financial Review online, 2 hours before the decision was taken.
Well, I'm not going to shed any light for you today on the deliberations of the ERC.
No, I'm not asking for that. Isn't that embarrassing that that kind of thing can happen?
Look, any time private confidential discussions become public is unhelpful. But we have been a very cohesive government. I mean, we are making decisions, and we did, as an ERC, bring down what has been a well-received budget. Those issues that you refer to relate to Northern Australia. We've got a Northern Australia white paper coming out. We've already announced significant proposals in this regard in the budget, around $5 billion worth of concessional loans, asset write-offs for new fencing, changes around insurance premiums. So we're getting on with the business of governing, Barry.
Yes, but you set a benchmark, though. You said you would do better than Labor. You were critical of the way that they performed in terms of budget leaks, and they had quite a record as well, but you're not doing any better.
Well, they didn't even have a cabinet. They had a gang of four, Barry, as you might remember. A subcommittee of cabinet made all the decisions, and I'll be turning on our ABC this week to watch a rerun of those history wars, because I think we'll see the dysfunction and chaos come back to the fore, and Bill Shorten, as we know, was a protagonist in all of that.
All right, now on the economy, and the March quarter national accounts figures came out. You've got a figure of 0.9%. Joe Hockey described that as a terrific set of numbers. That's a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it?
No, it was a very strong result at 0.9% for the March quarter. It was faster growth than we've seen in the United States, in Canada, in Japan, in Europe, so it is very strong. What was particularly pleasing about those numbers was around the export volumes, which are up, but also the export of services. You see services are
not the price that you're getting for them, though.
Yeah, well, we can't control the terms of trade, and you're right. That's been a big hit to our bottom line, because we inherited a budget at a time when iron ore, which is 1/3 of Australia's exports, was $130 a tonne. It's now down to under half of that.
Yeah, and Michael Stutchbury, the Financial Review, described that as an income recession because the prices are down. The goods might be up, but the prices are down.
Well, it is tough dealing with a budget when you've got such a sharp drop in commodity prices, but there were some really positive signs in those national accounts. I mean, when I say the export of services, 70% of the Australian economy is services, but only 17% of our exports. Now, services exports were up 8% in those national account numbers. Consumer spending was up, and that's, I think, a function of low interest rates and lower petrol prices, lower electricity prices. And there are green shoots right across the economy. Barry, I, last Friday, went to the Jayco Caravan Park in Dandenong. Now, this started 40 years ago in the back of a cowshed. It's a family-owned business which now employs 1,000+ people in manufacturing. What a great story.
Sure, but 0.9%, you can't expect that sort of figure to be repeated. The figure year on year is just 2.3% or something. Now, that's well below par, and it's not enough to stop unemployment from rising.
Well, it's actually consistent with our budget forecasts of around 2.5%.
Yes, but that doesn't make it any better.
Well, we are hoping growth will continue to strengthen, and the fact is the budget, which was very well received, will help stimulate that, particularly for 96% of all businesses, which are small businesses with turnovers under $2 million, and we've seen how well received our budget's been in that regard.
Can I ask you a question that I don't think the Prime Minister really answered in the Parliament this week? Do you agree with the Head of Treasury, John Fraser, that there is a housing bubble in Sydney?
Well, housing prices have gone up, particularly in Sydney, to a lesser extent in Melbourne, but they are patchy across the country. I mean, the median house price, Barry, in Sydney is about $750,000.
But I was asking specifically about Sydney. Is there a housing bubble in Sydney?
Look, I don't think there's a housing bubble. I think housing prices have gone up, but I mean, it went up higher in the early 2000s.
Why would John Fraser conclude that there is?
Because what he's talking about rightly is the increase in prices in Sydney has been strong. But if you, as I was saying, the median house price in Sydney is $750,000. In Hobart, it's around $300,000. In Adelaide, it's just around $400,000. In Brisbane, it's about $450,000.
Yeah, sure. John Fraser said
unequivocally,
there's a housing bubble in Sydney, and you say he's wrong.
Well, I'm saying that we need to watch the housing price growth, and APRA and the RBA, which are the regulators, are doing that. But at the same time, we have seen strong housing prices before. In the early 2000s, housing prices increased by 20% for 3 years in a row, and then were steady for a decade. And there wasn't a bubble that led to a major correction. So we have seen these sort of rises in housing. It's a function of a number of things. It's a function of population growth. It's a function of, state governments not engaging in enough land release. It's a function also of foreign investment, and that's why we're introducing changes around foreign investment too.
They did also make a reference to some parts of Melbourne. You probably live in the middle of the bubble in Kooyong.
That's right.
Is there something you should be saying to new home buyers that because interest rates are historically low, just be careful when you're investing in housing?
Well, everyone has to be careful, but what we would say to them is we're doing a number of things. Firstly, it's the state governments that have a lot of control over housing affordability, planning, property taxes, land release. And there's actually a State Treasurer's working group on housing affordability led by the Victorian Treasurer Tim Pallas. We've actually seen the construction of new dwellings in Australia up by 200,000 last year. Now, that is higher than any time under the Labor Party, which is also significant, as well as the tightening that we have done on the Foreign Investment Review Board for foreign investment in domestic real estate, which so far the Labor Party has refused to support.
On superannuation, David Murray, who led your financial system inquiry, he says that the superannuation system cannot continue the way it is going. Disengagement with the issue could bring the whole system down. And yet Tony Abbott says he has no plans for super in the future. That's a never ever answer.
Well, that's your words, never ever.
Well, he said no plans in the future.
And he's absolutely right. But the point here is that we took a commitment to the Australian people at the last election. We would make no unexpected or detrimental or adverse changes to superannuation. We'll stick to our commitment.
For this term, yes.
But the Labor Party, when they were in government, made 12 adverse changes to super, an extra $9 billion taxes, and brought great uncertainty and instability to the sector. Now, we treat Australian people's hard-earned savings very seriously, Barry.
But can you afford to say never ever?
But what I'm saying to you is we have no plans to increase taxes on super, because that's what you saw under the Labor Party. Now, they've just put announced...
So you put at risk the whole system collapsing, according to David Murray?
No, the whole system is not going to collapse. What we've got is $2 trillion worth of people's hard-earned savings in super today. That will grow to $9 trillion by 2040. It's one of the highest pools of superannuation savings in the world. We want to protect people's savings, and we want to encourage people to save. Because what David Murray actually said, Barry, in that report, in the Financial System Inquiry, is the more people save, the less pressure it puts on the age pension. And that's what we want, less pressure on the taxpayer to encourage people to save, and that's what tax concessions do. Right. And that's what Chris Bowen supported in his book. He said that you shouldn't change the tax concessions because you need to encourage people to invest in super.
Well, you're signing up to this idea that no plans for super in the future. Why then did you say that you could go to the next election with a reform proposal on superannuation?
Well, we have a tax white paper, and that's about simpler, fair and more efficient taxes, and we will listen to all the submissions that come in, but we have no plans to increase taxes on super, and it's quite a distinction with the Labor Party.
But there might be a reform proposal.
No, I'm just saying we've got a tax white paper process. It's across many different areas. Let people put their submissions in and we'll consider them.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Great to be with you, Barry.